Kia ora everyone, this is Anderson's Odyssey. I'm Jacob Anderson and my guest today is Dr. Mike Joy, who's a freshwater ecologist and advocate for environmental protection. Thanks for coming along, Mike.
Yeah, no worries. Good to be here.
Yeah, so everyone now knows about flattening the curve. It's been kind of heard loud and clear. But scientists and others have been talking about flattening the curve for decades when it comes to carbon emissions and trying to change biodiversity loss. And there's been a lot of talk now about how we can use this as the restart we need and kind of channel some of the energy into changing environmental problems or using that energy to transition, I suppose. What do you think are some of the tools or things we can learn from this exercise that can help us transition into solving some of those environmental problems?
Well, I guess first and foremost is that we can change. I mean, now we've just shown we can. I mean, up until now, up until this crisis, it was so plain that we needed to change. We needed to massively change, and nothing happened. And suddenly, because something's right in our faces, I guess, and government did realize that they had the mandate to make really tough changes, and so they have. So I'm hoping that the lessons from this, I mean, this is, I got to be honest, this is the first time in a couple of decades that I've felt positive about our future, is that suddenly out of all this inaction, we have some action. And so I think it's a fantastic opportunity. This is so much. This is like a warning. It's a gentle slap to get us to wake up. It could have been so much worse, and climate change will be so much worse if we don't do something about it. And not just climate change. I see this, COVID, as this virus, as just another symptom like climate change and biodiversity loss and the other things that we know are so crucial.
Yeah, do you think it's the fact that this is so urgent or so kind of apparent, that's why we have responded, whereas these other issues are sort of slow burning and people generally live in that kind of the moment rather than these long form problems that they can't really see or they don't feel immediately apparent?
Yeah, I think that's got to be it. I mean, when you're talking about, and people could see the graphs and they knew that we had to do something within days or within, because we knew that within a couple of weeks you start to see this, this kind of exponential rise in the number of cases and deaths. So people could see it's an urgent, real problem right in front of them. Whereas all these other issues they keep hearing, the public keeps hearing, or, we don't have to do anything till 2030 or something's going to happen by 2050 or something. So as soon as you put a date like that on it, I think the general public just go, oh, okay, cool, we can worry about that in another 10 years time sort of thing. So it's the urgency, and it's the feeling that it actually is, the realization that it's actually hitting people that we know, could be us or our parents or our grandparents or our friends. And so I think there's it's a combination of things, but it's about reacting to real threats that are right in front of us versus a threat that's, maybe later on, and we're just hardwired as human beings to react to, we've had 100,000 years of evolution teaching us to react, not to worry about things in the far off distance, but to react to things that are happening right now.
Yeah, I think the one eye opener is now people appreciate nonlinear change. So
yeah,
I think hopefully from this we can now help people understand that the way that the Earth or the climate system responds is nonlinear, just like this is, and this incremental increase in temperature that we're seeing today, and the impacts of it are not just gradual forever, and we will see this intensity really scale up with just a few more. So we're at 1.1 degrees now, we go to 2 degrees or to 3 degrees. That change doesn't just ratchet up like that, as does the impact on the biodiversity, and that's only one part of a lot of these problems. I mean, what are some of the science and the community have really got behind this issue and really kind of worked together. But what do we have to do to try and get community buy-in and businesses and others to work together on some of these environmental problems where they've historically pushed back, even though the evidence is right there in our face as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm hoping, and I get the feeling that that a whole bunch of people have suddenly the lights gone on, you know, in their brains that the way we live is actually, you know, the consumption rates that we're at, the way that we as a human population have outgrown the planet. I think a lot of these realizations are coming home to people, plus the fact that you can, in many cases, there are many people realizing that they can live a more simple life and it's still fulfilling, and it doesn't, you know, and quiet streets and you know, being at home more often and doing stuff in the garden and being more resilient in your life is actually really cool, because there's been really strong influence from advertisers to convince people that the only fun you can have is when you're spending lots of money and traveling around the world and that kind of thing. So I think, you know, I'm hoping that there's a lot of kind of reevaluation of what's important in people's lives, and that will come out of this with it, you know, with much easier to convince people that we do need to think about the future and how we live.
Yeah, and when we think about that and we think about different land use in New Zealand, and I know you've spoken a lot about different types of land use and issues, and I want to kind of firstly talk about the Canterbury Plains in particular. And we've seen over the last 20 years, 30 years, this rapid transition from sheep and beef to dairy farming in New Zealand. And in particular, the Canterbury Plains has had a massive impact for a variety of reasons, but we continue to farm this area. We continue to create more freshwater issues and problems with soil and other things. But why is that area in particular not a good place to be doing dairy farming, and why should we really be rethinking how we use that land?
Well, I think it's really clear, you know, in the Canterbury Plains that, you know, one of the big issues for dairying, the way we do it, is the way we currently do it is nitrate, and nitrate and a bunch of pathogens that come from cattle. And the problem with the Canterbury Plains is they're very light soils. So you've got, you know, basically just alluvial outwash plains from the Alps. So very, very quick pathways from what happens on the paddock to what gets through to groundwater and then into the spring-fed streams and into groundwater aquifers. You know, that exacerbated by the fact that you've got most of the human population, or nearly, well, I'd say all but a couple of the human population drinking groundwater. So they're drinking directly, you know, what they're drinking is almost directly influenced by what's happening on the land. And the fact that that was dry land, and so to make it into dairy farming, you had to, you know, instigate a huge amount of irrigation, so pumping out of groundwater out of rivers onto the land to enable that dairy farming to happen, which is just flushing the system even faster and pushing that nitrate and those pathogens and through into groundwater. So anyway, yeah, and a bunch of pesticides and other things that are used. So basically a really, really dumb place to do intensive farming, and the dumbness of it has shown up very, very quickly with elevated levels of nitrate in drinking water. The linkages that I've been talking about, where it may be a coincidence, but the highest levels of nitrate we find in the country are in Canterbury, South Canterbury and Southland, and they're also the areas where we have the highest rates of colorectal cancer. We have the highest rates in the world in New Zealand and in the developed world, and we have the highest rates in New Zealand and Canterbury and South Canterbury, and Southland, and those other places that the drinking water nitrate levels are really high. And there's heaps of evidence from around the world of a strong connection between high nitrate levels in drinking water and and cancers. And so that's just the tip of the iceberg of, I guess, in a way, it's like the COVID coronavirus thing, in that you can actually see a direct impact on health outcomes, as well as, you know, ecosystems and rivers and aesthetics and fishing and all those other things that we lose in this process. So yeah, it's kind of a case study in how to get land use, how to do everything wrong when it comes to appropriate land use.
There's still pushback now, isn't there? There's still people fighting against this and saying that this evidence isn't true. And what?
I mean, there's always vested interests that'll fight. This is exactly the same as smoking and cancer. You know, we had the whole process of the industry denial. And industry don't always directly deny it themselves. They have other channels that they use. They've got lots and lots of money. So the fertilizer industry and the dairy industry, you know, Fonterra's risk of stranded assets if they reduce dairy production, milk production in this country. You know, so there's a lot of money that's tied up in making sure they're quieting any voices that kind of question what they're up to here. And, you know, the good old, you know, the old problem that we've had for a long time about GDP. So, you know, it's increased GDP in Canterbury, even because you're not counting the costs, or you are counting the costs, you're just adding them to GDP. So, you know, that there's, you know, the crazy thing is that hospitals get busier, say with colorectal cancer cases, and you spend more and more money, the health dollar, then it increases GDP for the region. And you spend more and more money trying to clean up rivers, or if you have to spend huge amounts of money finding another water supply for all of the residents of Canterbury, you know, millions of, or over 1 million people, you know, that'll be a huge cost, and that will be added to GDP. So, you know, while we've got this kind of dumb measure of economics where we ignore the costs or the externalities and we just count everything as a positive, you know, as long as money's turning around, then, you know, there's the industry and the proponents of the people that are making money out of this harm will keep saying that it is, and they have a captive audience of people that are in the system already, the land values that are tied up, the irrigation companies, huge amounts of money to be made out of exploiting that environment. So that's what we're up against.
Yeah, and you do get that paradox where you have these health issues and that sort of thing, and you haven't even addressed actually the ecological impact really. But in terms of the freshwater impacts on the environment, and I think just recently another report's just come out illustrating that a huge amount of New Zealand's rivers are still in really poor quality. And I think that we don't really think about the freshwater ecosystem the same way that we do our birds and other wildlife. But what sort of state is our freshwater ecology in New Zealand in some of these areas compared to a healthy, pristine freshwater environment?
Yeah, I mean, that report out today from Ministry for the Environment just, you know, nails home the issues that we have. And I think probably, you know, for your listeners, the most obvious statistic that tells you the problems we have is that we have 3/4 of our native fish on the threatened species list. And that's higher than any other country, any other developed country in the world by a long shot. You know, when I just wrote a paper on it last year, and that you know, places that we would think of as having lots of polluted rivers, you know, the average is about 30% native fish on the threatened species list. We're 75%. We're, you know, and the fish integrate everything that's happening in our freshwater ecosystem. So that's probably this, you know, what I would call one of the strongest signs of our problems. And if you have a look at that report from Ministry of Environment, the state of our rivers for 2020, the 2020 report, you know, almost everything that's measured is getting worse, and the main places that it's a problem are in urban and rural catchments, farming catchments and city catchments. And the important thing to remember, though, is that the urban catchments make up less than 1% of the length of waterways in New Zealand. So, you know, there's often this call from the farming industry, oh yeah, but the townies are really bad. Well, they are, and we are, and but it's in proportionally about half of our river length is in pasture farming catchments, and 1% is in urban catchments. So, you know, you've got to go to where the biggest problem is, and the biggest problem is from the way we do farming. It's not that there's anything wrong or harmful about farming. And if you went back 30 years or 40 years in New Zealand, you could see how we could farm without having all those, well, nowhere near that kind of impact. It's about intensity. It's about the way we pour so much fertilizer in to maintain stocking rates that are double or more than what we had, you know, a couple of decades ago. We import huge amounts of palm kernel. We're the biggest importer in the world of palm kernel, so a whole bunch of environmental issues around the palm industry, and we're part of that by taking the palm kernel and feeding it to our cows. We make milk out of fossil fuels by using nitrogen fertilizer that's made from fossil fuels, so a third from Kapuni or from Maui, from our Taranaki gas fields, and 2/3 from the Middle East. You know, these are all totally unsustainable, stupid ways to produce a product that, in the case of dairy, this milk powder, you know, a small proportion of it goes to things that people would recognize and know, like milk and cheese. Most of it goes to this kind of, well, nobody really, you know, can nail it down, this milk powder that goes as a commodity to be sold on world markets, where it either ends up as infant formula, so replacing breast milk, and most of that is in Asia and the poorer countries in Asia, and the rest of it goes as a filler in junk processed food. So it's, you know, the kind of justification that we're feeding the world just does not hold up at all. It's just a commodity junk food filler.
So I mean, you talk about some of these smaller products, and there's a call to go from volume to value. So we reduce the amount, and then we create these high value products. But do you think the reason we aren't doing that is largely because so much of it is just being sold as milk solids and infant formula, rather than these high value dairy products that we could be selling with a much lower environmental impact in the way that we create those products?
Yeah, well, but of course the problem is the tyranny of distance, and so we couldn't be much further from our markets than what we are. You know, so only a few percent of the milk products that are made in New Zealand are consumed here. Big markets are overseas, and if you know, it's perishable. The only thing you can do with it to make it not perishable is to dry it and turn it into milk powder. And so we do this crazy thing where we use all of that water to produce that milk, and then we dry it back out again using mostly fossil fuels. So most of the Fonterra plants that do the drying are using coal. And so, you know, then you take all, but the point of that is that then it's not perishable anymore, so it can sit in stores and you can ship it around the world in no great hurry. Whereas if those value-added products, I don't know that, can you think of many of those kind of value-added things that don't have a relatively short shelf life, and you know, they're bulky and hard, you know, they're expensive to transport. I mean, things like cheese and yogurt and milk and all that kind of thing. They're not really suitable, you know, for going long distances. So, you know, that's one of the limitations that we have on. That's why we really need to rethink, you know, what it is that we actually grow on our land here. And there's such a strong call around the world, you know, for plant-based alternatives to dairy and meat, but also local, and you know, globally, what's going to come out of this corona COVID thing, is that there's going to be much more realization that globalization is a problem, because it enables, diseases like viruses to spread so quickly. So there's going to be a really strong push all around the world for localization, and which is going to make it even harder for us to export food products long distances, I think.
Well,
So
I mean, in New Zealand, being with primary industries being such a huge part of our economy, I can't see how that would be entirely feasible if we depend on trade and we depend on all of these exports. And I agree that the milk solids is an issue, but generally speaking, I think that we make 40 times more food than we consume. I'm not sure if that's the exact figure, but it's something like that. And so it's such a critical part of New Zealand. So how can you see that localized model working when it is such a huge part of what we do? Or do you just imagine we need to be innovative and look at different industries and different opportunities and start exploring synthetic meats and milks and start exploring other types of ventures? Is that the sort of line of thinking where you're going?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I totally get it, how important, primary industries are, but that's because we've kind of made that happen, because we've I mean, just look at what we do with logs. It's exactly the same kind of thing. We grow these trees and then we ship off these unprocessed logs for someone else to make the money on overseas. And then we buy the product back again. So so we need to completely rethink what we do. So I'm just thinking that as far as the food production side of things, that the growth in plant-based foods means that not just for our local market, but globally, growing plants and being really good at that and making really good products that are seen as healthy and clean and green will give us, I mean, to me, that's our big marketing advantage here, is that perception from the rest of the world that we're clean and green. And we're so lucky we still have that perception, given the way we've trashed the ecosystems here. But so that's our opportunity. And so, yeah, we need to diversify way more than what we are now, and not have all of our eggs in one basket, or all of our milk bottles in one basket like we have at the moment. We need to be looking at lots of different ways of doing it. I mean, people have been talking about that. I've got a book in my bookshelf here called Getting Off the Grass, written by Sean Hendy and Sir Paul Callahan a couple of years, or probably 5 years ago now. But just pointing out that we have been for so long going in the wrong direction, and just we don't seem to learn. We just seem to keep wanting to do the same thing, even though it's causing us harm.
I think one thing we do see in some situations is we are seeing farmers who are restoring wetlands. We are seeing them planting a lot of natives, trapping. So there are some good stories, and there are farmers doing great work and trying to restore a lot of that biodiversity and promote the natural systems while they still farm. Do you see a good example of that, or do you think it's still only a small group of farmers, or is that cost factor just too much for a lot of farmers because they're still just kind of trying to get by each month, or what sorts of examples have you seen as you kind of travel across the country?
Yeah, I mean, I see all those things that you said. So there are many, particularly with dairy, many farmers who are indebted up to the eyeballs, and I know, some of them are friends, and they want to change, and when the bank pretty much owns your farm, you buy less fertilizer, and they'll jump on you straight away, because they don't, as far as they're concerned, it's like a factory, and the more fertilizer that goes in one end, then there must be this, a matching amount of product that comes out the other end. Not understanding the non-linearity of a biological system. And so there is that. There's the indebtedness, the high land values that have got out of control, which means that a huge proportion of the farmer's time and the cow's milk and the amount of water used, all of those things just go to pay interest to those, handful of, overseas owned banks that provide the finance for those really high land values that we have at the moment. So that's a huge issue. But yeah, there are some fantastic farmers and there's really good change happening. Personally, I don't think that any of the legislation makes very much difference at all to farmers. And so what I see happening is there's a movement, a ground up movement of change, going under the banner of, well, there's organics and there's regenerative farming is kind of the coverall term for a whole bunch of really good things that are happening on farms, and that's getting away from using fossil-based fertilizers, getting away from using a whole lot of those chemical treatments, really concentrating on looking after soils and that kind of stuff. So there is a great ground up movement happening there. There is slowly getting out the realization that despite Dairy New Zealand and the fertilizer companies fighting it for so long, there is a realization now that you can farm a lot less intensively and make more money, less inputs and more profit. But again, it's difficult when you've paid too much for the land in the first place. So I see a whole lot of great initiatives happening around the place, but they're small and they're slow, and I feel that the threats that are coming for for a lot of our sort of primary industries, especially dairy, are coming from those plant-based alternatives. They're coming from the awareness of basically the social license. So the awareness of customers on the harm, the fact that animals are killed, that for dairy, that all those calves are produced every year that are killed, and the calves are taken off their mothers, and the impacts around, there was a lot of pressure on those Southland farmers and seeing cows up to their necks in mud and that kind of thing. So the social license for dairy especially is failing really, really fast. So I think the change that we'll see will come from, we're already seeing a big drop in land values. This COVID's going to knock the economy as well, which is going to see more problems with land values, I'm sure. So, Fonterra's in trouble economically. So I think there's a lot of, warning signs out there for the industry that they've left it too late, that they've ignored people like me and others that have tried to say that we're going the wrong direction here. They've listened instead to industry telling them to buy more fertilizer and buy more of our stuff. And so, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it won't. I've been involved for the last couple of years in the changes to the national policy statement around freshwater, and the industry's fighting that tooth and nail. They have all the way through, and now they're saying, you can't make us change now because of COVID. And so I don't think it's not going to come from legislation. It's going to come from their own industry falling apart if they don't get ahead of the game and see the writing on the wall and change the way they farm and the products that they produce.
So effectively the market will determine the outcome rather than the policy or the environmental impact ultimately.
Yeah.
A bit like how we used to use sheep and then we moved to synthetics. And then interestingly enough, now we're seeing a comeback in merino products. So sort of
that's the same kind of thing. And again, there were people running around, warning those sheep farmers that, so you had the same thing. Exactly what you hear now around, these plant-based things are never going to threaten, our animal-based industries. Exactly what the sheep farmers were saying in the day. And so, and so when it comes back, it tends to be, like you're saying with the sheep, with the wool, it comes back as, a premium product like merino wool. And then you have a whole lot of changes that happen on farm. And so the boom comes from much more more sort of green, environmentally friendly, sustainable farming practices that go with that product, that premium product, that people will pay that extra money for merino because they know the merino story and they know about the product. So that's where we need to be heading, I think, when it comes to what we do here, is to add the value, make sure we do it sustainably. Obviously the future for us, being far away from anywhere, is to grab that premium product, the premium market, and to have products that match our clean green image, because it's going to be worth so much to us in the future.
Yeah, I think that premium product is absolutely the way it's going to go, and I think that's a great point to end the conversation on. Do you have anything else you want to add to that, Mike? Or
I mean, we're due any day now to hear what the changes to the freshwater, that we've been working on, what the government's whether they're going to implement what the scientists have suggested around what should be measured in New Zealand. I'm not holding out a huge amount of hope for what will happen, and because like I said, I don't think government legislation is always too small, too little, and too late. And I just hope that the farmers of New Zealand don't listen to federated farmers and these old school kind of head in the sand types, like the New Zealand First people, and who just want to do what we've been doing and think that we're okay with that. I hope that they see the signs and realize that they need to change and look after themselves, protect themselves by not doing the old stuff and changing to low input, low intensity towards regenerative farming, and then they will have we all will have a much more positive future then.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for talking today, Mike. It's been really fascinating.
No worries. It's good to talk to you.
Cheers.